Welcome to Healthy Births, Happy Babies, where we share tips, tools, and stories grounded in natural childbirth and parenting principles, so that instead of feeling overwhelmed and confused during this exciting time in your life, you feel safe, supported, and empowered in your childbirth and parenting journey. And now, here's your host, Dr. Jay Warren.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren. I'm the prenatal and pediatric chiropractor here at the CAP Wellness Center. And today's guest is Sarah Bester. She is a picky eating coach. She's a nutritionist, and she's going to be talking with us about starting solids. And instead of just focusing on which foods to start with, which honestly is what all of us parents really focus all of our attention on when we're looking to introduce foods to our kiddos' world, she's going to talk about the bigger picture as well, looking at what to focus on and how to create healthy habits so that you hopefully don't have a picky eater later on down the line. So before we switch into that conversation with all the tips that she's going to share with us, please, as always, take a moment to listen to a word from our sponsor, the CAP Wellness Center. Hi, it's Dr. Jay, and one of the things I love about working at the CAP Wellness Center is being able to play a role in bringing a baby into the world that much more safely, much more naturally, and much more healthy. You know, it's something that is an amazing gift to give a child, to have them start off their life healthy without the stress and the trauma that can all too often be a part of the birth experience. So I consider it an honor to work with pregnant women to help them with that time during their pregnancy. And it is a privilege to be able to work with infants and help correct any distortions that might have happened through the birth process and allow them to start off their life healthy in alignment and in balance so that a health challenge doesn't hold them back from being all that they can be in this world. All right, so let me introduce our guest, and then we'll switch right over to a conversation together. Sarah Bester is a family nutritionist and a picky eating coach who helps busy moms raise healthy eaters instead of picky eaters. As a certified holistic nutritionist with an expertise in creating healthy habits, Sarah knows the importance of feeding our kids the right foods. As a mom in the trenches with 2 young kids and a third on the way, she knows firsthand how challenging it can be to actually get a meal on the table and the frustration that follows when kids refuse to eat it. Her research-based individual coaching and online group programs provide easy-to-follow steps that will put an end to picking eating and mealtime drama. More importantly, she empowers parents by giving them the tools to help their children develop long-term healthy habits. So with that, let me switch over to my conversation with Sarah. Hello, Sarah. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jay. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, this is going to be a great episode. I know we've been talking a little bit before we came to be on the podcast together, and you have amazing information about picky eaters. And I know with my listenership, this is a big challenge for them, as well as, you know, you work with a lot of clients around it. So I appreciate you being here and giving some nuggets of wisdom to help these parents out. So thank you in advance.
You're welcome.
So before we jump into all that, tell us how, you got interested, one, in nutrition, and then also working with this topic about picky eaters.
Yeah, for sure. So I am a family nutritionist and picky eating coach. And my journey actually started kind of way back. I think for a lot of people in the holistic health field, it started with me having some health issues, which I think tends to be common. Yes. Back when I started university, I did the whole typical university thing, started eating really badly, was staying up late, drinking a lot, and got to a point where I was just feeling really awful all the time. And it was one of those things where I woke up every day just feeling like I wasn't living my life to the fullest because, I had digestive issues. My skin wasn't looking great. I felt tired all the time. The type of symptoms that aren't super serious that would cause me to run to an ER or anything like that. But I always felt like I just wasn't showing up as my best self, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And yeah, it went on for quite a while. And I ended up I saw the conventional doctors and they did all sorts of tests and tried to put me on all sorts of medication. And, none of that really worked. And so I ended up, long story short, seeing a naturopath on the recommendation of a friend. I had never heard of a naturopath, wasn't into any of this, the holistic side of things, but I thought, what the heck, we'll give it a try. And she, did a few tests and really listened to me, which was a big thing. And basically, made a few changes to my diet, gave me a few supplements, and I ended up feeling better than I felt like in my entire life. Like all of a sudden I felt vibrant, I felt energetic, I felt amazing. And so this was a huge eye-opener to me about the power of food. And I just didn't realize what an impact it had. And so I decided to go back to school. I was working in a completely different field at the time, but went back to school for holistic nutrition. At the time, more just out of interest. I thought, this is something I want to learn more about. But I was pregnant with my son when I started back to school. And, really shortly, I started to realize that, I want to make sure that my children never feel the way that I felt. I want them to, from the very beginning, feel amazing and be able to show up in their lives in a way so that they can live it up to whatever potential they want to. And this became such a passion of mine. And so, during school, I started doing more research on kind of the child side of things so that when I finished up, I started my practice really focusing in on kids. And about that time, my son was starting solid food. And I thought, I have so much knowledge. I know everything there is to know. All I need to do is just give him all this healthy food and he is going to be the healthiest kid on the block and, will love everything. But I think as most parents, probably who are listening or maybe in that situation right now, it is not as easy as that. You can't just, put some kale in front of your child and expect them to eat it. So, it was very frustrating to me that my child did not want to eat up all these healthy foods. And so thus kind of began my journey into researching a lot about healthy habits. And I took some courses, I did a ton of reading, and I started to implement some of these things, not only with my son Tyson at the time, but with my clients as well. And, the whole healthy habits thing became a passion of mine. And then I started to just move into doing that exclusively.
Right. Well, and especially with starting solids, I know most parents exclusively goes into just what foods to start with, just physically which foods. And you incorporate, obviously that is important. I'm not saying that it's not, but looking at the bigger picture around habits, but then also like kind of a bigger picture of what you want to focus on when you're introducing those foods. So let's talk about that because I think it's so empowering for a parent.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I wish that more people kind of came to me at this point in their feeding journey. This is why I love talking about this because usually I get people coming to me with really picky eaters, which, I can help them for sure, but it's a lot harder to change kids once they have those habits. When you're at the pivotal point of starting solids, you have an opportunity to set your child up for those healthy habits early on. And like you kind of alluded to, most parents think, okay, well, it's all about what specific food I'm going to feed my child, and that makes a huge difference. But really, the thing that I emphasize with parents and what I think is really important if you want to raise a healthy eater instead of a picky eater is to really focus on long-term habits and not get caught up in nutrition. And the reason for this is that it's all about helping kids, set the stage for the long term. So if kids can develop a really positive attitude about food and eating now, they're much less likely to be picky. And, we're not going to be there to force broccoli down their throat, right, when they're 15. We want them to choose to eat the healthy foods so that they will naturally get all of those vitamins and nutrients and all the nutrition they need, and so that they can kind of self-regulate the amount of food that they eat and learn to listen to their body and all that good stuff.
Right. So it's not just for providing a variety of foods in front of them, but how you kind of present food, period, like as a meal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a huge difference because when parents get caught up in nutrition, unfortunately, they can possibly engage in what I like to call counterproductive eating habits. So it's the best intentions in the world as parents, right? We want our kids to make sure that they get the right vitamins, but in focusing on that, sometimes parents parents can apply, maybe apply too much pressure, maybe, kind of force their kids to eat when maybe a child isn't hungry, like things like that. And in the long term, that can, really affect their habits.
So what do you think are the main things that a parent should look at when we're starting to enter foods into the diet, or starting solids?
Mm-hmm. So I go through with my clients and kind of with the families I work with. I have a top 5 tips that I like to kind of emphasize with parents. So the first one, and arguably I would say this is probably the most important one, is to follow your child's lead. So in terms of how parents view feeding, I really encourage parents to look at feeding as a developmental process, just like learning to walk or learning to talk. It's something that every child is going to learn at a different rate. And, I shudder when I see information on feeding that makes parents feel that they have to start right at the 6-month mark. I mean, that's definitely a general guideline in most babies. That's kind of around the time that starting solids seems to work. But there are some babies that just aren't ready at that time. And parents get worried when that happens, but they need to keep in mind that breast milk and formula actually provides all the nutrition a baby needs up until the age of 1. And so this period between 6 months and a year is really all about helping them learn to eat.
Right. And, introducing solids, as everybody says, 6 months is the time. It's a developmental milestone, just like walking. It doesn't happen at a specific month. Although, if you have a 15-month-old that isn't walking yet, parents are freaked out about it. But, some people are just later, or kids are later. So good. I like that you have that kind of space of, like introducing it as something that's going to be a new exploration, but not something where, oh my gosh, I'm 7 months and the kid's not eating solids and we're behind.
Yeah, and try not to compare, your child to another child when it comes to feeding, because it's the same, like you said, as walking and talking. It's going to be different for every child. And, majority of children are going to end up in the same place, in a year or two. It's just allowing them to kind of show you when they're ready. And then that way, as a parent, you're not putting kind of undue pressure or maybe forcing them to eat when they're not ready, which can cause some anxiety around the whole feeding process, actually.
But that's what we as parents do. We're always comparing our kids to everybody else, right?
I know, right?
Right. In the baby circle, everybody else is eating, and the pediatrician says the growth chart's showing this.
Yeah. And that's why I like to say to parents, like, I want to give you permission not to compare yourself and not to worry about the fact that maybe your child is wanting to eat purees until they're 8 months, because that I have a lot of clients that's the case. Maybe they don't like chunks in their food maybe up until even 12 months, whereas other babies right away take to big chunks of food and are really comfortable with textures. And neither babies is wrong and neither babies is right. It's just, that's their style.
And that can be a preference things, as well as, a lot of babies have sensitive gag reflexes. Is that something that's going to tone down, right? Yeah,
definitely. Some babies certainly have more of a gag reflex, and so they are going to struggle a bit more with the chunks and the textures. And something that can play a part in that is just, if your baby puts a lot of stuff in their mouth before the 6 month mark, they tend to kind of get rid of that gag reflex earlier on, whereas other babies don't naturally put things in their mouth, so it takes them a bit longer to kind of get over that.
Or if a parent's like keeping stuff out of their mouth all the time, I mean, it's almost impossible to do, right? Just everything goes in their mouth, right? But it's a natural part of them exploring the world. And so allowing them to put more in their mouths might also allow them to start eating in a different way.
For sure. It's so funny you say that, because I do find with first-time parents, it does tend to be babies have more of a gag reflex for that very reason, right? You're a bit more maybe uptight about germs and, being a bit more careful. Whereas by the time someone has a third baby, it's like, oh, that baby's put everything in their mouth.
Right.
We have no time to stop them.
As long as they're not choking or bleeding, like, it's all right.
Exactly.
Good. Well, and you mentioned things about the growth charts and talking about comparisons.
Yeah, so that's kind of my second tip is for parents not to get too caught up in the growth charts. And I know it's really difficult because it's something that is focused on at every doctor's appointment. You know, the baby is weighed and the baby is measured, and then the doctor, you know, brings out this chart with the percentages and tells you where your baby is on the percentage chart, and then you go home and compare it to all your friends. And and then the other thing is that some doctors even and you know, nothing against the doctors. I know it's good intentions, but they do put pressure on parents to have their child at a certain place on the growth chart, or to, you know, gain weight or to feed them more, that type of thing. But again, it's really important for parents to remember that every child is different in terms of, you know, the rate that they're going to grow and the weight that is right for them. And in 95 or even 99% of the cases, they are growing at the rate that is right for them, and they are eating the amount that is right for them. And even if they are, you know, in the first percentile, there has to be a child at the first percentile or the chart wouldn't work. Right? There's going to be smaller children, just the same as we know that there's smaller adults, right, and bigger adults, and it's, you know, our bodies just naturally will try to stay at the weight that is right for us. And with children at extreme ends of the spectrum, what can sometimes happen is that, again, parents may interfere with eating. So either trying to get them to eat more, trying to get them to eat less if a child's maybe on the higher end. And again, this can really interfere with a child's ability to trust their own appetite. They start to lose the ability to know whether they're hungry or full because it's being imposed on them.
I can speak in my personal experience with my son. Yeah. He was like off the charts for height, like 99 percentile for height, and like 5th percentile for weight. Right. He's just got his granddad's body type, not my dad's body type. Right. FV's. He's just a long, lean kid, and so all those visits were like, all right, what are you feeding him? And he eats really healthy foods and lots of healthy fats and those kind of things. He's just one of those kids that's just skinny.
Exactly. And you're probably going to see that, you know, throughout his entire life, that he's probably going to maintain that as long as you're not interfering, maintain that typical kind of body shape throughout his life. And as long as the child is not drastically dropping in a short period of time, you know, there's very rarely a concern. And the thing I always say to parents too is that you really know your child. And if your child is low on the percentage chart, but they're healthy and they're happy and they're thriving, then they are probably just fine. Like, you would know as a parent if your child was not getting enough food.
Right. And that goes back to your first point around following their lead around when to stop feeding. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Because I think that's something that all parents kind of err on, of like, oh, like he didn't eat that much, so I need to like put some more in his face.
Exactly. Yeah. I get that question probably from most parents when they're starting solids is, well, how much am I supposed to feed them at every meal? Is it like 1 tablespoon? I read 2 tablespoons or whatever. And I know that it's, as a parent, it would be so nice to have like a really specific guide on how to do everything when it comes to parenting. But
absolutely, I'm still looking for it.
Me too. But unfortunately, even when it comes to feeding, you know, I never give parents a number because every child is going to be different. And some kids are going to have voracious appetites right out of the gate. Other kids, it's going to take them a little longer to warm up to solid foods. You know, if they're really keen on the breast milk or formula, which, as I mentioned before, has more than enough nutrients for a child. Some of them, you know, might just have a little bit at the time, and it's going to depend on the day. It's going to depend on the week, right? Some weeks your baby is going to have more activity than other weeks, so they may eat more. Some weeks they're going to be going through a growth spurt, so they're a little bit hungrier than they are in other weeks. So my message to parents is that, again, like you said, follow your child's lead and allow them to let you know when they want more, when they're all done, and to try to not interfere too much in those choices. Because again, we're trying to get our kids to really listen to their body and to know when they're hungry, so that when they get older, they know that as well. And they're not going to overeat, and they're not going to, you know, eat when they're stressed and all that kind of stuff.
Well, what about kids that they might get in the habit of eating the same foods over and over again? Like, is that something you want to follow that lead too, or do you want to try and shape that, or what's your advice on that?
Early on, you as a parent have a lot of control in terms of what you're putting in front of them, right? So the big thing is to provide them with a lot of variety. And, you know, if they're choosing to just eat certain things, you want to try to go with it, but never give up on the variety. Continue to offer a lot of different choice for them, because sometimes it just takes some kids a little bit longer to get used to the unfamiliar.
Right. And just keep offering it like throughout the week, or if they don't like it once, bring it back a couple days later or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Never give up on a food. That's the message I always say to parents, is never write a food off completely, because they may not like it one week, but 3 weeks from now, they may change their mind, or they may be feeling a bit more adventurous or whatever. And if you can, stop serving it, then you've lost that opportunity.
Right. And the babies, especially, their growth or the taste buds are changing all the time. So might not like a week later, it might taste completely different to them.
For sure, which actually brings me to the next tip. So that's a nice segue. So my third tip is really around expanding their palate. So, again, when parents get caught up in nutrition, sometimes what tends to happen is, again, the parents want to know exactly what food I should be giving my child to make sure they get enough protein, enough vitamin B, or, whatever else, they read that they should give their child. But again, I want to reiterate, breast milk and formula is like the perfect nutritional food for a child between 6 and 12 months. So they are getting everything they need. And I mean, even if they are eating a tablespoon or two of food, there's not a lot of nutrition in a tablespoon or two of food. It's not something that you can rely on. So instead, I really emphasize for parents to focus on expanding their palate. So this is where the variety thing comes in, because there is a ton of research out there that shows that babies who are exposed to certain foods, and this actually even applies to in the womb, what a mom is eating, but if babies are exposed to certain foods, even during the 6 to 12 month period when they're starting solids, they are much more likely to choose those foods later in life. So the food that they're eating now is really shaping their taste and their flavor preferences for life. So it's really pretty important.
Well, and that's something, again, like you really help people take it into a bigger picture of things. So, right, this is not just lunchtime. We got to get this inside the body right now. It's more of like building these habits that are going to foster into their teen years and in their adult years as well.
Yeah, for sure. Because for sure, you can force your child to eat 2 tablespoons of broccoli. You can probably get it in there if you really try, or you distract them, or, whatever you need to do. But like you said, it's a long-term, raising a healthy eater is really a long-term game. And you want to make sure that what you're doing now is going to help them really shape those habits for the long term. And some of those tactics, and some of the forcing and the control that you're trying to put into place can really have a negative impact.
Right. What about with everybody eating together? I mean, I know that's something you are a very strong advocate around, and I'd love for you to share your reasons why to our listeners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So eating together as a family so it's my 4th tip, and it is something that I think a lot of parents don't necessarily think about when their child is just starting solids, because you have this little baby who, might be eating a tablespoon or 2 of puree. And so often parents will, do that and then put the baby to bed, and mom and dad will make their dinner and kind of be by themselves, that kind of thing. But there is a lot of research on how much of an impact eating together as a family has, not only in terms of raising a healthy eater, but things like self-esteem in kids. Kids do better in school. They're less likely to be obese. They're less likely to smoke, believe it or not, if they eat with their family, or the family eats together as often as possible. But of course, when it comes to raising a healthy eater, that's kind of more my focus. It's really important for kids to see you as their parents, as their role models, enjoying a wide variety of food. So we're expecting, we want to raise kids who love a wide variety of really healthy foods. But if we're not letting them see us eating them, or see that it's something that's a normal thing in their family, it's going to be harder for them to accept that. And so the earlier on that you can do that, the earlier on you can let them see you modeling those healthy habits, it's going to be more natural for them to start joining in on some of those foods once you're ready to serve them.
And so like being all together and ducking the throwing of the food, all those kind of things is all part of your family experience, right?
Exactly. Yes. And sometimes it's not fun. Like I have 2 kids of my own. I have one on the way, but dinner times right now are they're pretty crazy for sure. And so, and my husband and I still will on Friday nights typically eat on our own, and it's not to say that parents have to do it every single meal. It's just making an effort to do it as much as possible and to, include your child in the meal together just, as much as you can in order to start that as being seen as kind of a normal thing in your family.
Yeah, it's a great habit to create. So tell me about your fifth tip.
So my fifth tip is, again, something that parents may think of later on when their children are older, but I like to bring it up now, and that is to get your kids involved. So I think there's a lot of press out there around, now getting kids involved in meal prep and how it goes a long way in terms of kind of picky eating and getting them to try new foods. But it's not too early, even at, the 6-month mark, even prior to the 6-month mark, actually. I really encourage parents with their babies to bring them in the kitchen. So, I have a lot of parents who are like, oh, I don't have time to cook because I got to watch the baby. Well, you know what? Bring the high chair right into the kitchen with you while you're cooking and allow them to just kind of be immersed in the smells and the sounds and the sights of food and real food, and the fact that, this food that they might be seeing in a pureed form, which, that's not what food looks like, allowing them to see, okay, well, this is where food comes from and get used to the smells and the flavors can go a long way in terms of their flavor preferences in the future. Even just, I remember when my daughter was younger, I'd have her in and, she'd be kind of reaching for things. Well, let them play with a whole carrot. Let them, smell things. Let them just really get immersed in the whole experience. And this, again, will help them see, cooking and food and all of this stuff is just kind of a normal part of life versus something that you are putting in front of them and kind of forcing them to be involved in.
Right. Or it just arrives on their plates and they get to eat it. They can actually later on participate. I know my son, Nico, he's 3.5 now. He loves being in the kitchen and pouring things in the bowl and actually cooking, which again, just like mealtime, can be a little crazy, right? It's got to 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, but at the same time, it's something where, okay, it's enjoyable as long as I get over the mess making part of it. It can be something I think it'll be really helpful for him later on.
Well, yeah, and you bring up a good point about them seeing food in kind of its real form. I've done a lot of workshops with kids in schools where we bring in a bunch of different fruits and veggies, and it's kind of a whole program around it. But it's always shocking to me how many kids, I can hold up a zucchini and they don't know what it is. These are kids who are in grade 1, grade 2, because they've never seen it in that form. They've seen it maybe cut up on their plate, or maybe it's mixed into a pasta sauce or something. They know they've heard the word zucchini, but they've never actually seen a zucchini before. And it's amazing how engaged they get when they get to actually hold and see it. And it makes them much more likely to want to actually try that food once it gets on their plate, because they're like, oh, I know what that looks like. It's really cool. And it's really neat how it, transformed from this, plant from the ground into the food on my plate. And so, those are things obviously as a child gets older, but if you can start those processes early, it just gets kids used to being in the kitchen and being involved like that.
So cool. So cool. Well, in our last couple minutes, I have a couple questions left for you, but tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you, and also you have an offering for them as well. I want to let you share.
Yeah, so people can find me on my website. It's www.sarahbester.com. And I also have a Facebook group. It's called the Raising Healthy Eaters Facebook group, which is a great community of moms where we talk about everything to do with raising healthy eaters, swap recipes, just share ideas. And it's a really fun place. So if people are interested, they can search for that. And then I have pulled together, because it's a lot of information in a podcast sometimes. You don't want to take notes. You have a baby in your hand. I put together a little cheat sheet with my 5 tips and just exactly how to implement them. So if listeners want to go to my website, www.sarahbester.com/healthybirths, they will be able to sign up and receive that there.
Great. Well, and I'll have all those links to your website, to the Facebook group, and the cheat sheet in the show notes, as well as on our website, so you can link right over to them and make sure you get these notes. Well, Sarah, thank you for this. And I want to tell you, just what's the major take-home message you'd like the listener to take away from what we talked about today?
Yeah, I would say the major takeaway is to really just trust your baby. So trust that they know what they're doing when it comes to feeding, because they do. And they're born with that innate ability to know how much to eat. And we want to just try to help them retain that. And the bonus with trusting your baby is it's a lot less stressful for you as a parent. I'm telling you, if you can just, chill out a little bit, the whole feeding experience is going to be really pleasurable for both you and the baby.
Nice. And what about for the baby? Do you have a little message you'd like to whisper into their little ear?
Yeah, I'd like to tell them that, the world of food is such a fun and wonderful place. So, be bold, be adventurous, and just make sure you listen to your body because it knows what it's doing and it knows what it needs to feel its best.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I'd love to have you back too to talk more about like toddler world and on beyond. But this is a great start for our parents. So I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information about this episode and other natural childbirth and parenting topics, please visit us at capwellnesscenter.com or message us on our Facebook page with any questions you might have. We here at the Cap Wellness Center look forward to helping you and your family be as happy and healthy as you can be.